So then, imagine yourself somewhere you probably didn't ask to be, which is rather the point of this story. You've drifted off, and instead of waking up to the gentle ping of your phone, or the comforting hum of a refrigerator, you find yourself waking up in a world with none of that. No coffee machine, no mattress, and sorry to break this to you, not even indoor plumbing. Welcome to medieval Europe, where most people didn't get to be kings or knights, despite what the movies tell you. In fact, the overwhelming majority of folks were peasants. And while it absolutely sucked to be one, it was also weirdly routine and, dare I say, a little soothing, if you ignore the constant backache, hunger, and occasional outbreaks of plague. But since this is a sleep story, we won't worry about plague tonight. Instead, we'll settle into the gentle rhythm of peasant life. Slow, repetitive, endlessly muddy, and therefore perfect for lulling you into sleep. So let's slip into scratchy homespun linen, grab a wooden hoe, and head outside. The rooster has already crowed, and the day isn't going to plow itself. The first thing to know about a peasant's morning is that it began early, painfully early. Before sunrise, in fact. If you thought you were a morning person in your modern life, think again. Here, morning starts when the rooster, who takes his job far too seriously, announces that it is time for everyone to suffer together. You wake up in a one-room hut, where the air is thick with the smell of smoke, damp thatch, and, yes, the faint odor of the cow that sleeps just a few feet away. This was perfectly normal. Animals gave off warmth, and walls made of sticks plastered with mud were not exactly known for their insulation. The bed isn't much of a bed either, more of a lumpy sack stuffed with straw which is somehow always prickly in exactly the wrong places. You roll off it, stretch stiff limbs, and remember that there is no such thing as a day off. Feudal obligations and survival don't wait for anyone. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is quick. A chunk of dark, dense bread, maybe a little porridge from last night if you were lucky. It's not designed to delight you. It's designed to fill you up just enough, so you can walk out the door, and work in the fields until your legs ache. Stepping outside, the first thing you notice is the mud. There is always mud, it doesn't matter if it rained yesterday or 2 weeks ago. Medieval villages seem to generate mud out of sheer spite. You trudge across it, your rough woolen tunic brushing against your legs, a rope belt digging into your waist. The air is cold in the morning, your breath puffing out in clouds, but the day promises to be long and hot once the sun climbs higher. The fields stretch before you, furrows carved into the earth by ox-drawn plows. These fields are your life. They will feed you if all goes well, or they will starve you if the weather disagrees. Today, the task is simple in description, brutal in practice. Sowing seed. A pouch of grain slung over your shoulder, you walk slowly up and down the rows, scattering handfuls of seed in an even rhythm. Step, toss, step, toss. Over and over. It sounds dull, and it is. But dullness, in its way, is restful. There's no space here for pondering your inbox or catching up on the news. The only thing to think about is whether the seeds are going in straight lines, and whether your back will seize up before noon. Around you the village stirs to the same rhythm. Men and women spread out in the fields, bent low over the earth. Children too small to work chase each other at the edge of the fields, while older ones join in the labor, their little hands helping where they can. Birds swoop in, hoping to snatch some of the grain before it even has a chance to root. You wave them away half-heartedly, knowing full well you'll never win against the birds. By mid-morning, sweat soaks your tunic despite the chill in the air, the sun creeps higher, shadows shorten, and the work goes on. Step, toss, step, toss. The monotonous rhythm lulls you almost into a trance, as though the earth itself hums beneath your feet. Your mind drifts. Perhaps you think about the tiny strip of land you've been allotted, the next round of taxes owed to the Lord, or whether you might manage to brew a bit of ale once the barley comes in. It's not a glamorous life, but it is steady, and in its dull, repetitive way, strangely comforting. And as the hours stretch on, you realize that in medieval peasant life, time itself seems to dissolve into work and routine, perfectly suited to lulling your mind into quietness now. As the morning wears on, you begin to feel the steady, nagging emptiness in your stomach. Breakfast was more of a formality than a meal, and now your body reminds you that bread and porridge are hardly the fuel for hours of bending, sewing, and trudging through furrows. The medieval peasant's diet was simple, monotonous really. Bread was the staple, heavy and dark, made from coarse grains that sometimes included ground-up beans, peas, or even a handful of weeds to stretch the flour. It filled you up, but in the way that a sack of wet sand fills a hole, dense, unyielding, and not especially pleasant. Meat was rare, reserved for holidays or when an animal grew too old to be useful. Most days it was bread, a bit of gruel, maybe some cabbage or onions if the garden was doing well. And ale, always ale, not the frothy pub kind you might be imagining, but a weak, watery brew, more like liquid bread than a night out on the town. At mid-morning, there's a pause in the fieldwork, more to keep people upright than to offer any luxury. You sit on a stone, pull out a hunk of yesterday's bread, and chew slowly. The crust is tough enough to give your jaw a proper workout. If you're lucky, there might be a smear of cheese or a bit of lard, but more often it's just bread, eaten with the kind of resigned determination that comes from knowing tomorrow's meal will be much the same. Children wander by, their hands sticky from clutching their own morsels, and someone passes a small jug of ale around, each person taking a swig before handing it on. It's warm, flat, and slightly sour, but it is safe to drink, which is more than can be said for much of the water. Then it's back to the furrows. Your back is already protesting. Bending, scattering seed, straightening, trudging. It's an endless cycle that turns muscles into knots. The work itself isn't complicated, but the sheer repetition is exhausting. And yet, it has its rhythm. The body falls into its own slow march, while the mind wanders freely. You find yourself thinking about small things. How soon the barley will ripen, whether the goat will produce enough milk this season, if the weather will turn in your favor. Always the weather. In a peasant's life, the sky was as important as any lord, and far less predictable. As the hours pass, the fields seem to blur into sameness. The sun creeps higher, your tunic clings with sweat, and the mud never seems to leave your boots. Birds call from the hedgerows, oxen snort and plod along the edges, and everything carries on in its steady, plodding way. It is dull, yes. But dullness has its own strange comfort. Here, there are no surprises, just the land, the seed, and the slow turning of the day. By the time the sun begins its slow descent, the rhythm of the day is fixed. You've scattered seed until your shoulders ache, bent low until your back stiffened, and walked furrow after furrow until your legs feel like wooden posts. Still, there is more to be done. Peasant life is a cycle of relentless maintenance. After sowing comes weeding, mending tools, tending animals, repairing fences. Nothing is ever truly finished. Today, as the fieldwork slows, you move on to other chores. Checking the small strip of garden near your hut, tying up sagging pea plants with bits of twine, and pulling weeds that seem to grow twice as fast as the crops you actually want. The soil crumbles beneath your fingers, dark and damp, and the smell of earth lingers on your hands long after you're done. Livestock calls for attention next. A pair of scruffy chickens wander too close to the garden, scratching where they shouldn't. The cow, tethered near the hut, lowly demands hay, and the pig snuffles noisily in its pen, unimpressed with the day's offerings. These animals are not pets, they are survival on hooves and claws. Their care is tedious, repetitive, and absolutely necessary. Feed them, clean after them, mend their shelters. Then do it again tomorrow. By late afternoon, the body begins to move almost on autopilot. Hands know where to reach, when to scatter feed, how to pull a weed without thought. The repetition dulls the mind until only faint observations linger. The buzzing of flies, the lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through thatch. Time blurs into sameness. The evening meal looms ahead, though you know it will be as unremarkable as the one before. More bread, a ladle of pottage, vegetables boiled until they surrender completely, and maybe, just maybe, a bit of salted fish if fortune has smiled. It is not a feast, but it is enough. As the sun dips low and the long shadows stretch across the fields, you trudge back toward your hut. Your body is heavy with fatigue, but the mind is oddly quiet. The world is reduced to its simplest parts: earth, seed, bread, labor, rest. There is no grandeur here, no stories of knights in shining armor. Just the soft repetition of ordinary days, each one blending into the next, steady as the tolling of a church bell. And in that sameness lies its own peculiar calm. The life of a medieval peasant might have been hard, yes, but it was also predictable, repetitive, and deeply monotonously peaceful. If you are hoping that after a long day in the fields a medieval peasant might at least enjoy a hearty dinner, well, brace yourself for disappointment. The food was not designed to delight, it was designed to keep you alive, and only just. Bread was the cornerstone of the medieval diet. Not the fluffy, golden loaves you might find at a modern bakery, but heavy, dark rounds of coarse grain. Often made from rye, barley, or oats, and sometimes bulked out with beans, peas, or whatever the miller swept off the floor, it was dense enough that a slice could double as a blunt weapon in an emergency. Fresh bread was a luxury. Most of the time you chewed yesterday's loaf, hard as a roof tile and twice as unyielding. A knife helped, but often you didn't cut bread so much as gnaw at it until it softened, like a determined beaver working at a log. Children soaked theirs in ale or broth to make it manageable, while adults developed jaw muscles that could rival an ox. And yet, for all its faults, bread was essential. Without it, there was no meal. The saying went that bread was the staff of life, and if that was true, this particular staff was knobbly, splintered, and liable to poke you in the gums. Next came porridge, or pottage as it was called then. Imagine a pot kept on the fire day after day, into which vegetables, grains, and the occasional shred of meat were thrown. Cabbage, beans, peas, onions, whatever you had, you boiled it. If you didn't have much, you still boiled it. The result was a murky stew that shifted from one day to the next, sometimes thin, sometimes thicker, always slightly suspicious. Leftovers never truly disappeared, they simply dissolved into tomorrow's batch. In a way, the pottage was immortal, a bubbling cauldron of culinary déjà vu. And then there was ale, not the strong, frothy drink of tavern tales, but a weak, everyday brew. Children drank it, monks drank it, peasants drank it from dawn to dusk, not because they all wanted to stumble through life tipsy, but because it was safer than the water, and at least it tasted faintly of grain. Brewed at home in small batches, ale was more like liquid bread than anything else, filling, and faintly sour. It was the medieval version of staying hydrated, though hydrated is a generous term when your water comes with a side of yeast. Meals were taken communally, around the smoky hearth of the hut. Family members sat on benches or stools, dipping hunks of bread into the pottage, sipping from wooden cups of ale, and talking little. Conversation was a luxury reserved for those with energy left after a day's work. For most, eating was a quiet, practical affair. Fuel taken on board so the cycle of labor could begin again tomorrow. Still, there was a comfort in the sameness. No one expected surprises at mealtime. No one demanded variety. Bread, porridge, and ale might not make your mouth sing, but they filled your stomach and steadied your mind. And in their dull, dependable way, they carried you through the long medieval day. The trouble with a peasant's diet was not so much what was on the table, but how rarely the table offered anything different. Variety, after all, is a modern luxury. In medieval life, you ate the same things day in and day out, until even the sight of another bowl of pottage could make you sigh. Hunger shaped the rhythm of meals. During the late summer and early autumn, food was more plentiful. Gardens yielded beans and peas, orchards dropped apples and pears, and fields offered grains fresh from the harvest. Bread, though still dense and unappealing, at least came from newly milled flour, its crust still smelling faintly of grain and smoke from the oven. Pottage gained a little more substance, with onions, leeks, and maybe even a carrot or two if fortune had smiled. These were the good weeks, when you felt almost well-fed, if only by medieval standards. But winter told a different story. By January or February, supplies dwindled. Bread loaves grew smaller, stretched with whatever fillers could be found. A handful of acorns ground into the flour. A pinch of bran swept from the bottom of the sack, anything to keep the dough together. Pottage became thinner, relying on dried beans or cabbage leaves long past their prime. Salted fish, if you had it, added a whiff of variety, though whiff was sometimes the polite word for smell strong enough to empty the room. Hunger was a companion in those months, never enough to knock you flat, but always there, gnawing quietly, reminding you that life could shrink to nothing more than the space between meals. Children ate first, their bowls filled before the adults. Men and women often settled for less, scraping the pot and accepting their rumbling stomachs as simply part of existence. The act of eating itself became ritualized. Bread was broken, never sliced, for knives were precious and hands were reliable. A shared pot sat in the center, and each person dipped their piece of bread into it. This was not fine dining, It was survival with a wooden spoon. Silence often hung over the meal, broken only by the scrape of spoon on bowl, or the slurp of broth. The fire smoked heavily, filling the air with the smell of wood and char, stinging your eyes as you tried to enjoy the meager warmth it gave off. And yet, there was a strange rhythm to it all. Eating at the same time, in the same way with the same people. Knowing what to expect, even when what you expected was another hunk of bread and another sip of ale. That sameness dulled hunger into something manageable, something ordinary. You didn't think of feasts or roasted meats or spices from faraway lands. You thought about whether the loaf would stretch another day, and whether the pottage pot still had something to give. It wasn't exciting, but it was enough, and in medieval peasant life enough was its own kind of blessing. For all its monotony, food still offered small comforts. Even bread that could break a tooth was better than an empty stomach, and pottage, thin as it might be, warmed the body after long hours in the cold. Ale, weak and sour though it was, gave a faint sense of ease, smoothing the rough edges of hunger. Meals were rarely joyful, but they were anchors in the day, drawing family together around the smoky hearth. Every so often, there were bright spots. Feast days punctuated the calendar, often tied to the church's rhythm: Christmas, Easter, saints' days. On these occasions the table changed character. A bit of meat might appear, pork from a slaughtered pig, or perhaps a goose fattened for the winter. Spices were rare, but herbs from the garden, parsley, sage, thyme, added fragrance. Sweetness too was rare, though honey might make an appearance, drizzled over bread in golden stickiness. These days felt extraordinary, not because the food was lavish by modern standards, but because it was different. Variety itself was a luxury. But most days remained stubbornly ordinary: bread, porridge, ale, morning, noon and night. The children might laugh over a particularly large turnip found in the stew. The adults might share a weary smile when the bread didn't crumble entirely into dust. Even these tiny events took on weight when life was so narrow. Community often gathered around food. Neighbors might lend a handful of beans, or trade eggs for a piece of cloth. Harvest time saw groups eating together in the fields, hunched over bread and ale while watching the grain come in. Weddings, baptisms, and funerals were marked by shared meals, sometimes meager, sometimes generous depending on the family's fortune. Food was never just fuel, it was the thread that tied lives together, even when the meals themselves were simple to the point of boredom. By evening, the fire dimmed, the pot was scraped clean, and the last crust of bread tucked away for tomorrow. The family settled into the smoky, cramped hut, stomachs not exactly satisfied but quiet enough. Hunger never vanished, but it softened under routine, becoming as much a part of daily life as mud on your boots or aches in your back. And so, the rhythm continued. Bread that filled but rarely delighted, porridge that stretched from one day to the next, ale that quenched thirst without ever quite satisfying it. Nothing dramatic, nothing grand. Just the steady monotony of meals that mirrored the steady monotony of work. Predictable, repetitive, and in its dull way, peaceful. If you were imagining a medieval peasant's home as something charming, perhaps a little cottage with roses round the door and a cozy thatched roof, you may want to lower your expectations. The homes were indeed small, and they certainly had thatched roofs, but charming isn't the word most peasants would have used. Drafty, muddy, and smoky were probably closer to the mark. The typical house was built from wattle and daub, which sounds rustic in a storybook sense but in reality meant sticks woven together like a basket, and plastered over with a mixture of mud, straw, and, yes, animal dung. It worked, in the same way a patched umbrella works. It kept out just enough rain to stop you drowning, but not enough to make you feel comfortable. The walls cracked in dry weather, bulged in wet weather, and always carried the faint smell of the livestock that provided their ingredients. Inside the hut was one room, maybe two if you were especially lucky or prosperous. The floor was packed earth, swept often but never quite clean. Rushes or straw were scattered over it to soften the feel underfoot, though after a week or two, they began to smell as though they'd been put there to hide secrets best not uncovered. In winter, fresh straw was laid down, not so much for cleanliness as for insulation, though one suspects the mice and insects appreciated it most of all. The roof was thatch, bundles of reeds or straw laid thickly enough to keep most of the rain out. It worked fairly well, but had a tendency to shelter entire ecosystems. Birds nested in it, insects lived in it, and if you were unlucky, a family of mice might choose to move in overhead, scattering little gifts down onto the rushes below. At the center of the hut was the hearth. No chimney, no flue, just a pit or stone ring on the floor where a fire smoldered constantly. The smoke rose slowly, and then stubbornly refused to leave, filling the air with a permanent haze. On damp days, when the smoke clung low and refused to rise, you could practically chew it. Eyes watered, lungs rasped, and yet this was the heart of the home. Fire meant warmth, fire meant food, fire meant survival. The family huddled around it for meals, light, and what little comfort the hut could offer. Furniture was sparse, a table if you were fortunate, a few stools, maybe a bench. Beds were straw pallets stuffed into sacks, shared by parents, children, and sometimes even animals in the colder months. Privacy did not exist. You lived together, worked together, and slept together. One tight, smoky, mud-walled community. Unromantic, yes, but there was a strange, steady practicality to it all. The hut did not aspire to grandeur. It simply kept you alive through wind, rain, and snow. And in its rough, smoky way, it did the job. Step deeper into the hut, and you'll notice how every part of it was functional, nothing wasted. Along the walls hung tools, wooden spades, iron-tipped hose, a battered sickle or two, always ready to be pressed into service in the fields. In one corner, sacks of grain were piled carefully, each sack representing survival. If rats got into them, or damp ruined them, it meant hunger. Near the hearth stood a large pot, blackened from years of use. This was the pottage pot, the one that never truly emptied, its contents slowly replenished with whatever could be spared. Beside it, wooden bowls and spoons, worn smooth from countless meals. Nothing matched, and nothing shone, but everything had its place. At the back of the hut, you might find a small loft or raised platform, used for storage, or for children to sleep if the family was large enough. In some cases, animals were brought indoors at night. A cow or goat tethered in one corner, a few chickens perched in the rafters. Their warmth was welcome, their smells less so. Still, practicality overruled comfort. You couldn't risk losing them to cold or thieves. Light came sparingly. Windows, if they existed, were little more than narrow slits covered with oiled cloth or wooden shutters. Most of the day, the hut relied on the hearth for both light and warmth, the fire casting flickering shadows on the mud walls. In winter, the days felt short, not only because of the sun, but because life shrank to the glow of a single fire, the rest of the hut, dim and indistinct. Noise carried differently here. Outside, the fields hummed with birds and oxen, the wind rushing through hedgerows. Inside, the dominant sound was the crackle of the fire, the occasional cluck of a chicken, the murmur of voices. Children whispered or played with simple toys, carved sticks, rag dolls, knucklebones. Adults spoke less, their words measured, energy conserved. The home was not a place of lively chatter, it was a place of rest after relentless work. Even so, there was comfort to be found. The familiarity of the smoky air, the feel of straw underfoot, the rhythmic creak of the thatch in the wind. All of it created a sense of enclosure, a small barrier against the vast uncertainties of the outside world. For Peasant's home was not beautiful, but it was safe, and that, in a world of endless labor and looming hunger, was enough. As evening settled in, the home became the center of the universe. The fields, the Lord's demands, the endless toil, all faded once the door was barred, and the family gathered around the hearth. The fire, small though it was, cast a golden glow on faces, warming tired bodies. A pot of pottage bubbled quietly, filling the air with the earthy scent of cabbage and beans. The bread, hard and unyielding, was broken and dipped into the broth. Ale was passed in wooden cups, each sip chased with a sigh of relief. This was not luxury, but it was ritual. The same gestures repeated night after night until they blurred into one long, continuous memory. Children drowsed on their straw pallets. Adults murmured over the day's tasks, and the fire snapped and hissed. The hut filled with the mingled sounds of chewing, coughing, the shifting of bodies on straw. There were no books to read, no clocks to watch, no lamps to keep the night at bay. Time moved according to the fire. When it burned low, the family prepared for sleep. The rushes on the floor rustled as people settled down. Blankets pulled close, bodies pressed together for warmth. The smell of smoke clung to everything: clothes, hair, skin, but it was as ordinary as air. And in that smoky darkness, the hut became a cocoon. Outside, the village lay silent under the stars. Wolves might howl in the distance. Wind might whistle through the hedges. But within these mud-plastered walls the family rested in its own fragile sanctuary. The roof might leak, the floor might crawl, but the hut endured, year after year, season after season. It was humble, cramped, and unremarkable. Yet it was also the center of peasant life, the place where hunger was eased, where warmth was shared, and where exhaustion gave way to sleep. A wattle-and-daub home might not be the stuff of fairy tales, but for those who lived in them, it was everything. The life of a medieval peasant may have been muddy and exhausting, but there was another kind of existence, just as monotonous, though in a very different way. Picture a monastery, tall stone walls enclosing a world apart, where the rhythm of life is not dictated by the seasons or the lord of the manor, but by the tolling of bells. You awake not to a rooster but to the clang of a handbell in the cold pre-dawn dark. It is time for matins, the first service of the day. The monastery does not care that you are comfortable, or that sleep still clings to your eyes. Time belongs to God, and monks live by the clock of prayer. You rise from a narrow cot in the dormitory. The room is spare, stone walls bare but for a small wooden cross. Straw mattresses creak as your brothers stir, feet shuffling across the flagstone floor. No one speaks. Silence is not just encouraged here, it is expected. Words are rationed like bread. Instead, you communicate with gestures, nods, the soft creak of the wooden door as the line of monks files into the cloister. The air outside bites at your skin. Stone walls loom above, black against the faint glimmer of stars. The cloister is silent except for the scrape of sandals on the worn paving and the faint rustle of woolen habits. The chapel glows faintly ahead, candles flickering in the gloom, casting long shadows across carved stone. Inside, the monks kneel. The air is cool, scented faintly with beeswax and smoke. A voice begins the chant, low and steady, and others join, their voices weaving into a single droning sound that fills the stone hall. Latin words repeat, again and again, their meaning less important than their rhythm. Time dissolves into sound. The chant does not rush, it unspools slowly, like a thread unwinding in the dark. The service ends. Silence returns. The monks file back through the cloister, the sky just beginning to pale. The day will be long, measured not by hours of toil in the fields, but by prayers, readings, and labor of a different kind. And always, it will be wrapped in silence, the kind that muffles thought, until the mind becomes as still as the stone walls around you. Morning unfolds with prime, another service, then a simple meal, bread, cheese, perhaps a ladle of pottage. Unlike the peasant's smoky hut, meals here are taken in a refectory. Long wooden tables, rows of monks sitting side by side, bowls set out in careful order. Silence still reigns. As they eat, one brother reads aloud from a holy text. His voice echoes through the hall, slow and deliberate, while spoons scrape against bowls. Eating is never simply eating, it is prayer, contemplation, nourishment of body and soul at once. After the meal, the community disperses into its tasks. Some tend gardens, where herbs grow in neat rows, sage, rosemary, thyme, plants valued as much for medicine as for flavor. Others bake bread in great ovens, or brew ale for both the monastery and the surrounding villages. But a select few return to a special chamber, the scriptorium. The scriptorium is not grand. A long room with narrow windows, letting in just enough light to see by. Wooden desks line the walls, each with an angled surface for writing. Quills, ink pots and sheets of parchment wait, patient tools for endless labor. Monks sit at their desks, hoods pulled low, shoulders bent. The only sound is the faint scratch of quills and the occasional sigh when ink blots or parchment tears. Copying texts is the work of hours, days, even years. Each letter must be formed with care, the script precise, the spacing even. Mistakes are unwelcome. Parchment is costly, and corrections must be made with a knife scraping away the error. It is slow, painstaking, and utterly absorbing. Where a peasant spends the day scattering seeds in the soil, a scribe scatters ink across parchment, both repetitive, both backbreaking in their own way. The silence deepens, time slips away, measured only by the scratch of quills, the turning of a page, or the distant toll of the bell calling to the next service. Work, prayer, monotony, yes, but also rhythm, a rhythm that soothes, that carries the mind away from itself. By evening, the day begins to draw inward. Vespers, another service of chant and prayer, brings the community back together in the chapel. Candles flicker in the deepening shadows, their light soft against the stone. Voices rise once more in unison, low and steady, until the sound fills the vaulted air. The refectory offers a final simple meal, bread again, perhaps beans or fish, washed down with ale brewed thin. Conversation is still absent. Eating is slow, deliberate, and soon finished. Plates are cleared, the hall empties, and the monastery settles into its nightly quiet. In the cloister, the stone pathways echo faintly with footsteps. The air smells of damp and wax. The world outside has grown dark, but within the walls the rhythm continues unchanged, as though time itself is kept in check by the steady toll of the bell. The silence is not oppressive, but enveloping, a silence that smooths away thought, like water smoothing stone. Finally, the monks return to the dormitory. Straw mattresses, rough woolen blankets, the sound of breathing in the dark. The day has been long, but not dramatic. No feasts, no battles, no roaring fires. Just the slow cycle of prayer, labor and silence, turning over and over, like the pages of a manuscript. And as sleep gathers in the stone stillness, you realize the cloister's greatest power was its monotony. A life of ritual so predictable, so unchanging, that it eased the mind into calm. For monks as for peasants, repetition was survival, and in that repetition lay peace. The scriptorium is a quiet kingdom all its own. Long rows of wooden desks stretch across a narrow chamber, each occupied by a monk hunched over a sheet of parchment. Sunlight, or more often, the faint gray light of an overcast sky, filters through narrow windows, just enough to illuminate the faint ridges of the ink. You settle at your desk, quill in hand. The ink is black and dense, and the quill stubborn, as though it knows it will be tested by your patience. Each letter must be formed deliberately. Too fast, and the ink blots. Too slow, and the hand cramps. Every stroke counts. A single misplaced line or smudge could require scraping the parchment and starting again. A tedious ritual that tests both patience and temper. Around you other monks labor in silence. The scratch of quill against parchment is constant, a low hypnotic murmur that fills the room and seeps into the mind. Some monks copy scripture, others illuminate letters with delicate gold leaf or subtle colors. A tiny mistake in the miniature artwork could ruin the visual balance, so each movement is slow, deliberate, precise. Even the most mundane day in the scriptorium is exacting, and yet there is a strange satisfaction in the rhythm. The monotony is not unpleasant, it is meditative. Step by step, letter by letter, word by word. Time stretches, dissolving into the gentle rhythm of repetitive labor. The outside world, wars, hunger, mud, and all the discomforts of village life, cannot intrude here. In the scriptorium, everything is reduced to focus, patience, and the slow progress of ink on parchment. Every so often, a bell in the monastery tolls, but it does not startle. It simply marks the passage of time, a reminder that the day continues as it always has, and always will. Outside, wind rattles the shutters, but inside, the quills scratch on. A page is completed, another begins. Step, scratch, turn, repeat. Lunch in the monastery is brief, a small meal taken quietly in the refectory. Bread, cheese, and a cup of thin ale sustain the body, but the mind has been nourished elsewhere, in the repetition of ink on parchment, in the careful formation of each letter. You return quickly to the scriptorium, carrying the quiet calm of shared purpose with you. The hours stretch endlessly. Some pages are filled with dense blocks of text, others with ornamental capitals that demand concentration, patience, and a careful eye. Your fingers ache, your back stiffens, but the slow rhythm keeps the mind steady. The scratch of quills, the rustle of parchment, the faint scent of ink and wax, all combine into a lullaby of quiet diligence. Time becomes elastic. You do not watch the clock, you watch the progress of your work. Lines of text, orderly and deliberate, accumulate. Mistakes are corrected carefully. The process is repetitive, yes, but in a way that almost soothes the mind. There is a comforting certainty. Every day is the same, every stroke predictable. Outside chaos cannot penetrate this chamber. Even small distractions, the occasional cough, a creaking floorboard, a faint breeze rattling the shutters, are absorbed into the rhythm. Life outside may be unpredictable, but in the scriptorium the only concern is the work in front of you. The repetition becomes a meditation, a gentle push toward mental stillness. And so you continue, quill in hand, parchment in front, page after page, step, scratch, turn, repeat. No hurry, no excitement, only the slow, steady rhythm of careful labor that stretches into the afternoon. Evening approaches, and the light outside dims to a cool gray. Candles are lit, their flickering glow casting long, soft shadows on the walls. The scriptorium transforms, the same work continuing in a gentler, quieter light. Shadows of hands and quills move across the walls like slow dancing ghosts. The monks labor on, undistracted. Eyes strain against the dim light, but the rhythm remains. Page by page, letter by letter, the work accumulates. Mistakes are repaired with careful scraping, smudges corrected, lines realigned. It is painstaking, exacting work, yet there is a strange beauty in it. Each page a small triumph of patience, repetition, and quiet dedication. As night deepens, the scriptorium empties slowly. A few monks remain, working in near silence, until the final quill is laid down. Ink pots capped, and parchment stacked neatly. Outside, the wind whistles past the stone walls, and the monastery settles into night. Inside, the chamber holds the residual warmth of labor, the faint scent of ink, and the echo of quiet diligence. The day has passed without drama, without excitement. There are no battles, no feasts, no celebrations. Only repetition, precision, and the soft satisfaction of work done well. And in that repetition lies calm, a gentle easing of the mind into quietude. For the monks, as for peasants, predictability, rhythm, and diligent routine are the truest comforts. As you close your eyes in the dormitory later, the memory of quills scratching and parchment turning lingers, soothing, repetitive, steady, the perfect lullaby for sleep. After the scratch of quills and the quiet ritual of copying manuscripts, the day in the monastery continues in a different rhythm. The gardens. Monks leave the stone halls and step into an enclosed courtyard, where the earth has been ordered carefully for centuries. The walls shield the garden from wind, and the layout is deliberate. Herbs in neat rows, vegetables in tidy plots, each plant chosen for a purpose and planted with precision. You walk among the beds, the soil cool beneath your fingers. Sage, thyme, rosemary and parsley grow side by side, their scents mingling in the morning air. Some herbs are used for cooking, others for healing, and a few, like rue or hellebore, are kept for rarer, more complicated remedies. Each plant is known intimately: a leaf's texture, a stem's angle, the subtle curve of a root. These details matter, because in a world without pharmacies, knowledge of herbs could mean the difference between life and death. Daily life in the garden is painstaking. Weeding is a meditative task. Tiny sprouts must be distinguished from intruders. Roots loosened carefully to avoid damaging nearby plants, and soil turned with gentle, deliberate motions. Hands quickly become caked with dirt, fingernails blackened by the rich, stubborn earth. Sun warms your back as you bend low, yet the repetitive motion lulls the mind into calm. The air is alive with small sounds: bees buzzing among the lavender, the whisper of wind through rosemary, the distant crow of a rooster reminding you that time continues outside this protected sanctuary. Monks move silently along the paths, carrying baskets of seeds, small spades, or watering vessels. Occasionally, a bird hops along a stone path, unafraid of human presence, adding a tiny flourish to the otherwise measured rhythm. The purpose of this work is as practical as it is ritualized. Sage leaves are picked and dried to be brewed for digestive discomfort. Chamomile flowers are collected carefully for teas to soothe troubled sleep. Nettles are harvested for poultices to ease aches and bruises. Each movement is deliberate, precise, almost ceremonial, yet rooted entirely in necessity. There is no rush, no distraction, only the steady pulse of repetitive labor. By mid-morning, your body hums with exertion, but the mind drifts freely. You notice the subtle differences between plants, the way sunlight touches a leaf, the gentle hum of life in the garden. Each task repeats, each row of plants tends to its own rhythm, and the monotony, rather than being oppressive, becomes soothing. A lullaby of tactile labor, of living in harmony with time and the slow growth of nature. As the day stretches on, attention turns from mere maintenance to the preparation of remedies. Herbs collected in the morning are laid out on wooden tables, their textures and scents carefully assessed. Leaves are dried in bundles, roots scraped and sliced, flowers crushed gently with mortar and pestle. The work is slow, methodical, and repetitive. Every action has a rhythm: crush, sift, grind, sort. Step by step, the ingredients are transformed from living plants into usable medicine. The process is also quiet. The garden has its whispers, but the scriptorium's silence lingers in memory, the way focus sharpens, how every movement matters, how repetition soothes. The same is true here. Hands busy with tasks, eyes tracing the lines of a leaf, the mind drifts toward a calm emptiness. The garden becomes a meditation, each small motion repeated until it feels almost automatic, yet never careless. Some remedies are straightforward: a poultice for a bruise, a tea for a cough. Others are more intricate: mixtures to ease fevers, concoctions to soothe stomachs, tinctures to fortify the weak. Instructions are memorized and passed down, a chain of knowledge stretching back through generations. There is pride in this quiet expertise, though it is modest and unspoken. The purpose is service, not recognition, and that very repetition, that ritualized care, creates a profound sense of calm. Between the work the mind wanders. Perhaps you observe the way morning dew clings to a leaf, or the faint twitch of a caterpillar among the stems. Perhaps you reflect on the slow passage of seasons, the cyclical nature of planting and harvesting mirrored in every aspect of monastery life. Each task reinforces this rhythm. Nothing is hurried. Nothing is wasted, and the slow, steady pace carries the mind towards serenity. By afternoon, bundles of dried herbs are stacked neatly, labeled carefully, ready to be stored or prepared for use. Baskets of fresh plants sit to the side, awaiting transformation. The repetition, the attention to minute detail, and the methodical nature of this labor combine into a meditative flow. Time seems to expand and slow. Every breath, every small movement, every rustle of leaves becomes a quiet lullaby, guiding body and mind toward restfulness. As evening falls, the final tasks of the day unfold. Herbs are stored in wooden boxes or hung from beams in the cool, dry chambers above the garden. Mortars and pestles are cleaned, tools rinsed, and the workspace returned to order. The garden itself is quiet now, shadows stretching over the beds, wind soft against the stone walls, and the faint hum of insects settling into night. The monks move back toward the dormitory, hands still fragrant with herbs. Each step retraces the rhythm of the day. The same paths, the same gentle motions, the same rituals repeated. Evening prayers, simple meals, and finally, the return to straw pallets await. The physical labor has ended, but the quiet meditation of the day lingers in the mind. It is an exhausting, repetitive life, but in its repetition lies comfort. Each movement, each careful action is predictable, controlled and steady. The senses are filled with gentle stimuli, the smell of herbs, the roughness of soil, the warmth of the sun gradually fading. Even the aches of the body are softened by rhythm, by familiarity, by the assurance that tomorrow will repeat this gentle cadence. Finally, the day ends. The garden rests under the stars. The monks settle into the dormitory, the scent of sage and thyme lingering in their habits. Eyes close, and the mind drifts, lulled by the echo of rustling leaves, the hum of quiet work, and the steady, unchanging rhythm of days, lived slowly, deliberately, predictably. Peace is found not in excitement, not in grandeur, but in repetition, in simplicity, in the calm embrace of monotony. Castles. The word alone conjures images of knights in shining armor, banquets overflowing with roast meats, and high-born intrigue. In reality, castles were, well, they were also drafty, noisy, and full of chores nobody mentions in storybooks. Think less romantic fortresses, and more expensive stone-built headaches with a surprising number of rats. You enter the castle courtyard, stepping over puddles of mud, scraps of straw, and the occasional chicken that has wandered too far from the kitchens. The walls rise high above you, grey and unyielding, with arrow slits that allow defenders to fire at invaders, or in calmer times, just admire the view. Inside these walls, life is structured, hierarchical, and uncomfortably regimented. Every person has a role. Cooks cook, pages fetch things, squires polish armor, and the lord or lady of the castle basks in relative comfort, occasionally sighing at how hard it is to be, well, not a peasant. The great hall dominates the castle, a cavernous room with high ceilings, banners hanging from the walls, and a hearth large enough to roast an ox if you had one handy. It is here that most activity takes place. Servants scurry, plates clatter, and voices echo, carrying a mix of commands, complaints and gossip. The noble family may walk through, nodding politely, often with the sort of practiced boredom that comes from having spent too long observing life from above everyone else. Food preparation is relentless. Kitchens are hot, smoky, and crowded. Porridge for the staff, bread for the family, ale for everyone, and then the occasional extravagant dish for guests or the occasional feast. The cooks sweat over cauldrons, chop vegetables, tend fires, and curse under their breath when a pot boils over. Every dish is a performance, every meal a small logistical nightmare. Roast, stew, pies, everything must arrive hot, on time, and without incident. If a tray is dropped, the culprits quickly become the center of scolding, which is less dramatic than a duel, but somehow just as memorable to those involved. The servants move like a silent river through the stone corridors, wiping spills, carrying trays, lighting braziers, and occasionally chasing after the family's dog, which has decided that the buttery smell on the counter is worth a game of chase. Nobles may watch with mild amusement, but the work continues, uninterrupted, because a castle is a living organism, and someone must keep its heart beating. Time is divided by routine and duty. Morning prayers, inspections of the rooms, attending to minor complaints, ensuring that the larder is stocked, checking that the armor isn't rusting, and confirming that the walls have not been breached by either rain or unwelcome rodents. The noble household moves in a predictable, repetitive rhythm, punctuated by small dramas, spilled ale, a missing cloak, the discovery of a particularly bold mouse, and all of it, when viewed from the perspective of the modern mind, is strangely soothing in its predictability. The castle garden, or more properly the courtyard and surrounding lands, is another focus of daily activity. Nobles may stroll through, inspecting their property, but it is the gardeners and laborers who maintain the green spaces. Rows of herbs, vegetables, and flowers attended with care, paths swept clean of mud and debris, fountains cleaned and refilled. The effort is enormous, and yet it is invisible to most who benefit from it. Inside, chambers are prepared for the next guest, beds fluffed, or at least rearranged so that they look fluffed, and tapestries checked for dust or wear. Windows, often small and uneven, are cleaned as best as possible. Even in a castle, comfort is fragile. Drafts sneak through gaps in the stone. Rats gnaw at anything left unattended, and the smell of smoke from fires lingers persistently, as it does in every medieval home, high-born or low. Meals in the great hall are loud affairs, not loud in the modern, cheerful sense, but loud in the logistical, clattering, shouting sense. The lord may eat, yes, but he also oversees the staff. More salt. The pies now. Is that ale fresh? Voices echo across the stone walls. The fire crackles, and everyone moves in a delicate dance to keep chaos from tipping over entirely. It is exhausting work if you are serving. It is exhausting work if you are the lord merely trying to be attended to. The drama of privilege is often understated, but no less tedious. The smaller, personal tasks of daily life provide tiny amusements. A page tasked with fetching a candle wanders down the wrong corridor. A squire polishes armor obsessively, ignoring everything else. A noblewoman fusses over the arrangement of her sleeves before an evening meal. Every minor frustration, every tiny misstep, is a quietly humorous reminder that even in opulence, monotony, and small trials persist. No one escapes repetitive labor entirely, even behind stone walls and velvet curtains. By afternoon, routine dominates. Letters are written, accounts tallied, minor disputes settled. Some time is spent inspecting stores of grain and ale, ensuring that if a siege arrives, the household will endure. Every day repeats in variations of the same tasks: prepare, inspect, feed, clean, maintain. For all the grandeur, castle life has its own steady rhythm, not unlike the hum of a monastery or the fields of a peasant. The difference is the backdrop: stone corridors, polished wood, and a certain level of indoor plumbing, occasionally. Evening descends. Torches and candles cast long shadows along the corridors, flickering against stone walls. Fires crackle in hearths, sending warmth across cold flagstones. The household gathers briefly for a modest evening meal. Leftover bread, thin stew, perhaps a slice of meat if the cook managed well. Conversation is quieter than at midday, often a series of murmured remarks and polite observations. Laughter, when it occurs, is gentle, not uproarious, a reminder that even nobles tire of performance and logistics. At night the castle takes on a peculiar quiet. The wind whistles through arrow slits, settling into the halls with a low moan. Staff retreat to their quarters, exhausted from hours of serving, tending, and correcting minor disasters. The lords and ladies retire to their chambers, padded with tapestries and warmed with fires, yet still subject to the occasional leak in the roof, squeaking floorboard, or skittish pet. In this quiet monotony and predictability reign. Each day is a repetition of duties, inspections, meals, and minor dramas. Even the grandeur of the castle does not change the fundamental rhythm of life. Wake, work, eat, maintain, repeat. The structure, the predictability, and even the occasional absurdity, mice in the larder, ale spilling onto the stone floor, a squire polishing armor obsessively, create a strangely soothing cadence. And so, as night deepens, the household rests. Stone walls hold the warmth of fire, the echoes of clattering dishes fade, and the castle settles into slumber. It is not excitement or adventure that governs life here, but routine, repetition, and quiet humor. The hum of existence, uninterrupted, predictable, and strangely comforting. Life in a noble household is a delicate dance of ceremony, duty, and, if you are observant enough, quiet absurdity. Every gesture, every movement is measured. Every meal, every meeting, every greeting follows an invisible choreography refined over decades. In theory, this makes the household efficient. In practice, it means that a spilled goblet of wine can provoke a level of drama that might rival a battlefield. And a misplaced cushion on the Lord's chair is treated with solemnity, almost worthy of a council debate. Mornings begin early, though not as brutally as peasant labor. Lords and ladies rise from featherbeds that are, by peasant standards, extravagantly soft, and proceed through a series of personal rituals. Warming the chamber, washing hands in bowls of water brought by a sleepy page, dressing in layers of linen and wool, adjusting belts, clasps, and sleeves, all before breakfast. The attention to detail is exhausting to watch, and even more exhausting to perform. A noble's day begins with preparation for other people's observation. A slow parade of ritualized actions designed to signal status, wealth, and refinement. Breakfast is small but formal. Bread, cheese, maybe a slice of cold meat. Cups of thin ale or watered wine are handled carefully, never too hurriedly, and conversation is measured. Words are chosen for politeness, diplomacy, and occasionally for the thin thrill of wit, though laughter is understated, often accompanied by a polite cough to maintain decorum. Behind the scenes, servants move efficiently, carrying plates, refilling goblets, and catching the occasional dropped morsel before it touches the stone floor. All this takes place under the watchful eye of the household steward, who ensures that nothing violates the invisible rules of ceremony. The day's activities proceed in predictable sequence: meetings with retainers, inspections of the kitchens and stores, overseeing the polishing of armor or cleaning of weapons, and attending to the estate's accounts. Even leisure is choreographed. A stroll through the gardens is not a casual walk, but a carefully timed observation of plants, fountains, and the layout of hedges, a display of taste and cultivation. Every gesture, no matter how mundane, signals wealth, discipline, and propriety. Afternoons bring formal audiences, small councils, and occasionally the arrival of guests. A noble meal, should one occur, is a display of both abundance and order. Platters of bread, meat, and pies are arranged precisely, and wine is poured according to hierarchy. The household staff moves like a well-rehearsed army, avoiding collisions, refilling goblets, and anticipating needs before they are spoken. Any misstep, spilled wine, a dropped knife, a crooked plate, is noted with quiet disapproval, often lingering in memory far longer than the actual incident. Despite the pomp, monotony persists. The repetition of meals, greetings, and inspections creates a rhythm, albeit under a layer of ceremony. Lords practice signatures or seals. Ladies embroider intricate patterns or oversee the organization of wardrobes, and children are instructed in polite speech and proper posture. Even the occasional diversion, such as a falconry lesson or a hunt, follows strict rules. There is freedom, yes, but only within an invisible cage of expectation. Every day mirrors the last, with small variations: a different guest, a new pie in the kitchen, a slightly fresher loaf of bread. The subtle humor of the household lies in its excess of order. A squire polishing armor for hours may pause only to sigh at the shine of a particularly stubborn dent. A page tasked with carrying a candle down a corridor may nearly trip over a dog, which itself seems to have memorized the daily rhythm and moves precisely to test human reflexes. Even the nobility sometimes recognize the absurdity. A lady carefully arranges cushions for the lord's comfort, only for a cat to leap onto the chair, scattering them in seconds. These minor interruptions punctuate the repetition, adding quiet amusement, without ever disturbing the ceremonial rhythm. By mid-afternoon, fatigue creeps in. Featherbeds are far away, the sun beats down on gardens and courtyards, and the weight of expectation settles on shoulders. Yet the routine continues. Inspection of larders, tidying of private chambers, a gentle reminder that every action, even the tiniest, has meaning in the theater of status. The monotony is disguised as ceremony, but the rhythm is undeniable, a steady hum beneath the gilded surface. Evening arrives, and the great hall fills with muted light. Candles and torches are lit, casting shadows that flicker against tapestries depicting hunting scenes, battles, or family heraldry. The family gathers for a final meal: bread, cheese, meat, and ale, all presented with care. Conversation remains measured, laughter quiet and polite. Occasionally a humorous observation is allowed, carefully timed and delivered with a smile that signals wit without excess. The subtle humor of the household is quiet, restrained, but deeply appreciated by those attuned to it. After supper, the household disperses. Pages and servants attend to final tasks: clearing tables, stoking fires, arranging bedding, and securing the castle for the night. The nobility retire to private chambers, where personal routines, washing, writing letters, reading, unfold in solitude. Even these private moments, however, follow ritual. Candles placed at exact angles, cushions adjusted, clothes folded precisely. Order and predictability reign, offering comfort even in a world of formalities. The castle settles into quiet. The echo of footsteps fades. Fires burn low, and the distant hoot of an owl drifts through the courtyard. Life behind the walls may appear glamorous, but beneath the surface is repetition, careful labor, and the occasional absurdity of human behavior. The day ends as it began. Predictable, ceremonial, and rhythmically structured. The monotony itself becomes a kind of lullaby, comforting in its consistency, its quiet humor, and the subtle reassurance that tomorrow will unfold in much the same way. Stone walls, flickering torches, polished floors, and the endless cycle of protocol cradle the household into night. Predictable, repetitive, and quietly amusing, the rhythm of noble life, like that of peasants and monks, carries its own peculiar peace. While lords and ladies glide through their ceremonial routines, the real heartbeat of the castle hums elsewhere. The servant quarters, narrow corridors, low ceilings, and small dimly lit rooms house the people who keep the castle functioning. Without them, the lord's household would quickly descend into chaos, revealing that behind every grand hall, polished floor, or delicate tapestry is a layer of sweat, dirt, and endless labor. Mornings in the servant quarters begin early, long before the featherbeds of the nobility are disturbed. The cooks rise first, hands already smelling of dough and fire. Fires in the kitchen must be stoked before anyone else moves, and cauldrons filled with water must reach the proper temperature for cooking or cleaning. The air is thick with smoke and the pungent aroma of boiling broth. It is not unpleasant, strictly speaking, but it is undeniably real. Chores are immediate and relentless. The laundry must be washed, wrung, and hung, using methods that involve more elbow grease than modern washing machines would ever demand. Floors are scrubbed with brushes, straw rushes replaced or fluffed, fireplaces cleaned, and waste, human and otherwise, disposed of discreetly but efficiently. Anyone faintly romantic about castle life will find their illusions tested here. It is a world of constant movement, constant scrubbing, and perpetual exhaustion. Pages and younger servants are sent on endless errands. Fetch this, carry that, polish this, sweep that. They weave through corridors, dodging hasty nobles, distracted dogs, and occasionally each other, because despite the noble eye for order, chaos is unavoidable in a building inhabited by hundreds. Every misstep, every spilled bucket of water or dropped utensil, earns sighs, tutting, and the occasional whisper of how do they survive. And yet, there is rhythm in this repetition. Daily chores follow a predictable schedule, so that even the most mundane tasks, scrubbing floors, sweeping hearths, organizing the larder, fall into a pattern. Once you recognize the flow, it becomes oddly meditative. A scrubbing hand, a sweeping broom, a tray carried steadily across the stone floor. The monotony is not oppressive, it is oddly comforting. Afternoons bring new challenges. The kitchens must prepare meals for the household, the staff, and any guests. Orders are precise and incessant. More bread, fresh ale here. Where is the roast? The cooks respond with practiced calm, moving through heat and steam, knives flashing, pots clattering, while keeping one eye on the steward's ever-watchful gaze. Timing is everything. Too early, and the food cools before serving. Too late, and someone, usually a noble, complains. The corridors are alive with motion. Servants carry trays of food, candles, or messages. Pages sprint from one end of the castle to the other, dodging dogs, cats, and the occasional unsuspecting noble. The laundry is constantly in rotation. Sheets, garments, table linens, all washed, wrung, and rehung with attention to detail. Rooms are inspected, polished, and organized. Any deviation from perfection risks reprimand, though often with a quiet sense of humor at the absurdity of it all. In the servants' quarters themselves, life is less glamorous than the main hall, but not without small joys. Meals are simpler. Coarse bread, thin stew, maybe a bit of cheese or ale. Laughter, whispers, and occasional teasing soften the exhaustion. Here, hierarchy still exists, but it is tempered with camaraderie. Mistakes are shared, frustrations vented, and victories, such as finishing a particularly arduous day without spilling soup on anyone important, are quietly celebrated. It is exhausting, repetitive, and yet strangely meditative. Hands move on autopilot, eyes sweep the floor for dirt, ears perk for instructions. The rhythm of work becomes a lullaby in itself, its repetition predictable, comforting, and oddly soothing. Amidst the chaos and labor, the servants find a quiet satisfaction in knowing the castle runs smoothly because of them, even if no one outside these quarters ever notices. Evening descends, and the castle begins its slower rhythm. Fires are banked, kitchens cleaned, utensils washed, and beds prepared. The servants tidy their quarters, change into simpler garments, and settle in for a brief rest before morning demands them again. Outside, nobles retire to their chambers, unaware of the work required to maintain the world they inhabit. The air in the servant quarters grows calm. The constant motion of the day fades, replaced by quiet murmurs and the occasional snore. Hands are cleaned, backs rubbed, and bodies settle onto straw-stuffed mattresses. The work is done for now, but the memory of it lingers. The smell of smoke from kitchens, the scrape of brooms on stone, the hum of dozens of small unseen tasks performed without pause. Repetition defines their existence as much as it does the monks, the peasants, or the nobles. Tasks performed day after day, in a predictable rhythm, form the invisible backbone of castle life. Even the small absurdities, the cat chasing a rolling apple, the page slipping on wet stones, the cook muttering about spilled broth, carry subtle humor, reminders that life persists with dignity and occasional mischief, even under relentless labor. As the night deepens, the castle sleeps. Stone corridors echo faintly, with memories of the day's work. The servants rest, the nobles dream, and the walls hold the quiet hum of repeated effort. Peace is found not in excitement or grandeur, but in the rhythm of duty, the repetition of tasks, and the gentle, enduring humor found in the small chaos of daily life. One of the peculiar features of medieval life is how these very different worlds, peasants, fields, monks, cloisters, and noble households, exist in close proximity, yet almost never truly meet. Each has its own rhythm, its own daily choreography, and its own small absurdities. Yet from a distance patterns emerge, like a subtle symphony of repetition and ritual, each part echoing the others in muted harmony. Imagine a morning in the castle. Outside, peasants trudge to the fields, pitchforks in hand, trudging through mud, straw, and the occasional puddle that has formed overnight. Their muscles ache from repetitive labor, yet their movements are methodical, almost meditative, a rhythm imposed by survival. In the monastery, monks rise to matins, voices echoing in stone, quills scratching in the scriptorium, and herbs arranged carefully in the garden. In the noble household, pages scurry, fires stoked, bread sliced, and belts fastened with meticulous attention. Each world moves at its own pace, yet the same principles hold. Repetition, routine, and attention to detail govern life. Monotony becomes a kind of security. The peasants' endless turning of soil mirrors the monks' repetitive copying of manuscripts. The servants' scrubbing of floors and washing of linens mirrors the nobles' endless inspections and adjustment of cushions. Every small task, no matter how mundane, contributes to an invisible structure that holds society together. And yet, humor quietly persists. A peasant may mutter at a stubborn ox, a monk may curse an inkblot silently in Latin, and a servant may roll eyes at a lord's comically delicate napkin-folding ritual. Life, even in its repetition, has small absurdities that remind everyone that predictability is rarely perfect. By mid-morning, the overlaps become subtle but observable. A monk carrying herbs through the cloister may pass a page delivering a message to the Lord. Their paths cross briefly, gestures exchanged, neither particularly important, yet a rhythm emerges, all moving, all working, all repeating. In the fields, the peasants' progress is noted by the lord or steward inspecting the harvest. Every action has consequence, but the monotony softens it. The kitchen becomes a microcosm of these overlapping lives. Servants move with precision, preparing meals for nobles, while anticipating the occasional arrival of monks or visiting peasants for charity. Orders are shouted, instructions repeated, and food moves from pot to plate in a carefully choreographed sequence. Mistakes are smoothed over quickly, or noted with quiet amusement. The chaos of coordination becomes its own kind of calm, predictable, if occasionally exasperating. Evening brings a more noticeable intersection. Monks retreat to prayer, nobles retire to chambers, and servants carry out final chores. Occasionally, a lord may pass through the cloister on their way to dinner, nodding politely to the monks, who nod in return, eyes already half-lidded with contemplative fatigue. The servant carrying the tray of food weaves silently between them. Life is compartmentalized, yet the rhythms harmonize. Predictability binds the disparate roles together, creating a quiet continuity that is soothing in its reliability. Humor persists here too, in subtle ways. A squire polishing armor for the lord may be startled by a page who trips over a stray cat. A monk may glance up from his quill to see the noble adjusting a sleeve with comical seriousness. Even the most minor missteps become shared, though mostly unspoken, amusement. Tiny sparks of humanity amidst the unchanging flow of duty. As night falls, the rhythms converge into silence. The peasants' huts are quiet, smoke from dying fires curling into the cool air. Monks lie on straw pallets, lulled into rest by their chants, the scratch of quills now absent. Servants settle onto rough beds, exhausted from hours of carrying, scrubbing, cooking, and anticipating. The noble household retreats to featherbeds and quiet chambers, cushions fluffed, tapestries drawn, fires glowing low. Each world, distinct yet parallel, ends the day in predictable cadence. Repetition, routine and attention to detail govern all. Work completed, bodies rested, minds lulled by the rhythm of continuous, predictable action. Even humor, the tiny acknowledgement of absurdity, threads through these worlds. The stubborn ox, the ink blot, the misplaced cushion. It is small, often private, yet a gentle reminder that monotony is survivable, even comforting, when approached with patience and quiet amusement. And so the castle, cloister, and village settle into night. Walls hold warmth, fires burn low, animals sleep and humans dream. The unchanging patterns of labor, the slow repetition of daily rituals, and the small humorous accidents form a subtle lullaby, guiding each sleeper toward rest. Predictable, enduring, gently absurd, the overlapping lives of lords, servants, and monks carry the mind into calm, steady, unhurried sleep. Evening descends gradually, almost lazily, across the medieval landscape. The sun dips behind the distant hills, scattering pale light across fields, gardens, and the stone towers of the castle. Shadows stretch, elongating familiar shapes, and lending a slightly surreal air to the ordinary routines of daily life. Each world, the monastery, the noble household, the servant quarters, and even the distant peasant cottages, begins to shift into a slower, quieter rhythm, signaling the day's inevitable closure. In the monastery, candles are lit, their flickering flames casting soft, dancing shadows across the stone walls. The monks prepare for compline, the final service of the day. They move in careful, deliberate steps, their habits rustling, sandals scuffing lightly on the flagstone floor. The chant begins, low and measured, each voice joining the other, weaving a sound both solemn and calming. There is a meditative precision here. Each note, each breath, a small, repetitive act that slows the mind and eases the body toward rest. Meanwhile, in the castle, nobles engage in their evening rituals. A lady adjusts the arrangement of her sleeves and the folds of her gown, checking each detail in the reflection of polished armor or a small mirror. A lord reviews letters by candlelight, quill in hand, occasionally muttering a carefully measured sigh as he navigates the duties of estate management. Servants flit silently in the background, moving trays of food, lighting fires or drawing curtains to keep the draught from penetrating the stone walls. Everything is performed in quiet, deliberate repetition, an unspoken choreography honed by centuries of expectation. Outside, the peasants' cottages settle into their own gentle cadence. Fires smolder in hearths, filling the rooms with warmth and the faint scent of smoke. Animals are tended and fed before being settled for the night. Simple meals are finished, pots washed, and floors swept. Conversations are quiet, more murmurs than words, reflecting fatigue as much as habit. The rhythmic routines of rural life continue, slow and repetitive, like a lullaby carried on the evening breeze. Across these overlapping worlds, patterns emerge. The repetition of tasks, the measured pacing, the subtle acknowledgement of small, often humorous frustrations. In the monastery, a quill smudges despite careful attention. In the castle, a cat leaps onto a perfectly arranged cushion. A peasant child accidentally spills water while carrying it from the well. Each minor disruption is absorbed into the rhythm, acknowledged with a quiet smirk, and gently forgotten. A small spark of human humor against the backdrop of ordered monotony. As night deepens, movement slows further. Candles in the monastery burn lower, casting warmer, gentler light across the cloister. The monks finish their final prayers, voices fading, leaving only the whisper of wind through narrow windows. Quills are capped and set aside, pages of scripture stacked neatly. Herbs collected during the day rest in their bundles, carefully stored, ready for the morning's tasks. The day's labor, repetitive and deliberate, has carried the body and mind toward stillness. In the castle, evening is a blend of quiet observation and completion. Tables are cleared, fires banked to maintain warmth without consuming too much wood. Servants move in soft, rehearsed steps, ensuring that every chamber is tidy, every object in its proper place. Even the smallest detail is observed. A spilled drop of ale must be wiped, a stray leaf from the garden swept away. Nobles sit in quiet reflection, reading, writing, or simply observing the soft flicker of light across the walls, their daily routines having unwound into a peaceful, measured conclusion. In the servant quarters, exhausted hands finally rest. The day's chores are complete, laundry washed and hung, floors scrubbed, dishes cleaned and fires settled. Small whispers and muted laughter fill the dimly lit rooms, the subtle humor of shared toil lingering. Stories of spilled food, stubborn pets or minor misadventures circulate quietly among the tired workers. Even in exhaustion, there is satisfaction, the knowledge that the castle will run smoothly tomorrow because of their efforts, an unspoken pride wrapped in routine. Outside, the peasants' cottages are still. The hearth fire dims, smoke curling lazily into the night air. Animals sleep, meals are finished, and bodies are nestled in straw or coarse blankets. The rhythm of the day has been completed, and even in its simplicity, the repetition of routine offers comfort. Life continues as it always does, predictable yet full of subtle textures. The warmth of a fire, the faint scent of cooking, the gentle hum of wind through trees that soothe the mind toward sleep. Finally, the entire landscape settles. Stone walls of the monastery, castle, and cottages hold the residual warmth of the day. Fires crackle faintly before fading to embers. Candles gutter low. Outside, the wind whispers through branches, carrying a soft chorus of nocturnal sounds. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the occasional bark of a dog. Within the walls, bodies lie down, exhausted, muscles softening, and minds drifting into the gentle rhythm of rest. Even the smallest absurdities, the cat knocking over a candle, a servant's slipper sliding across the stone floor, a monk's quill forgotten mid-page, become part of the pattern, small markers in the steady repetition of daily life. They are quietly amusing, a reminder that human presence is never perfect, yet predictable enough to soothe rather than disturb. The overlapping lives, monks, nobles, servants, and peasants, merge into a collective lullaby of labor and repetition. The world has slowed, but it has not stopped. Tasks are paused, voices hushed, movements gentle. Every ritual, every chore, every moment of quiet humor contributes to the rhythm, guiding the body and mind toward complete relaxation. Sleep, patient and gentle, gathers in the rooms, corridors, and fields alike. The predictability of the day, the subtle human quirks, the overlapping patterns of work and ritual, all of it wraps the mind in calm, a soft embrace that eases away thought, leaving only the slow, meditative cadence of rest. The world holds still, just enough, and the quiet of night becomes the perfect backdrop for sleep. Midnight settles like a soft cloak over the medieval landscape. Outside the castle walls, in the fields, and within the monastery cloisters, the world exhales. The air is cool, heavy with dew, carrying faint scents of earth, smoke, herbs and animals. In the quiet of this hour, the rhythm of daily life softens to its slowest pulse, almost imperceptible, but endlessly reassuring. The repetition of labor, the minor absurdities, and the careful patterns of human activity echo gently into the night. In the monastery, the last candles gutter, leaving only shadows. Monks lie on straw-filled mattresses, minds wandering between prayers, ink-scratch memories, and the faint comforting scent of dried herbs. Some may dream of fields they tended, or pages they completed without error. The repetition of daily ritual lulls both body and mind into a slow, meditative calm. Every breath, every heartbeat, becomes part of a larger rhythm that extends beyond the stone walls. Meanwhile, in the castle, torches have burned low. Nobles rest in featherbeds, surrounded by tapestries and polished wood, yet still subject to the occasional minor disruption. A scuttling mouse, the flicker of candlelight across a shiny buckle, or a cat leaping onto the Lord's pillow with uncanny precision. The servants, too, have claimed a moment of stillness, small victories behind them, floors scrubbed, fires banked, linens washed. Their minds ease into rest, bodies softened from hours of deliberate motion. In every corner, life slows, pauses, and hums a quiet lullaby. Outside, in peasant cottages, the fires dim. Animals lie in straw, breathing soft and rhythmic. The humans in these small homes, too, drift into sleep, bodies and minds eased by repetition and routine, the daily cycle of labor, meals, and care having been fulfilled. Outside the walls, the fields rest, blanketed in shadow and moonlight. The gentle undulations of the landscape mirrored in the soft rise and fall of chests, and the subtle murmur of wind through trees. Dreams, when they arrive, follow the same subtle rhythm. The monk dreams of parchment, of letters completed with perfect care, of gardens tended row by row. The noble dreams of ceremonies executed without error, rooms perfectly arranged, small absurdities resolved with wit. The servant dreams of tasks fulfilled, of floors polished, fires banked, and minor disasters avoided, with occasional laughter at remembered mishaps. The peasant dreams of fields tilled, livestock tended, meals cooked, and the faint humor of a stubborn ox or a clumsy child. There is no rush, no chaos, only gentle repetition, mirrored in slumber. Patterns established during the day extend into dreams, monotony becomes soothing, labor becomes meditative, and humor, the quiet recognition of human absurdity, adds a subtle warmth to the subconscious mind. Even in sleep, the rhythm continues. Inhale, exhale, heartbeat, muscle relaxation. A gentle echo of repetition that lulls deeper with every moment. Outside, the world itself participates. Trees sway slowly in the wind, water murmurs faintly in streams, and the night sky, dotted with stars, seems to breathe with the same rhythm. There is a remarkable continuity between these quiet moments. A reassurance that life continues predictably, comfortably, and with small, endlessly amusing imperfections. Hours pass. Midnight becomes the early morning. The world remains suspended in gentle stillness. The monastery, castle, servant quarters, and village alike share in the soft calm of a night, lived slowly, deliberately, predictably. Even the smallest disruptions, the cat knocking over a small cup, the scuff of a slipper, the rustle of an animal, are absorbed into the gentle rhythm. Sleep deepens. Bodies relax fully. Minds drift into dreamscapes colored by repetition, ritual, and tiny humorous moments. The long, immersive cadence of daily life, from peasants in fields to monks in cloisters to nobles in their chambers, reaches a final soothing symmetry. The predictability of the day, the quiet absurdities of human behavior, and the gentle repetition of tasks provide a lullaby that extends far beyond the walls of any castle or monastery. And now, as your body sinks further into the comfort of its mattress, your mind floats on the gentle pulse of routine and rhythm, the faint echoes of human life softly harmonizing with the natural world outside. Let go. The world in all its repetitive, slightly absurd and quietly amusing glory continues in perfect order around you. You have observed, experienced, and drifted alongside it, and now it's time to let the calm carry you fully into sleep. The day has ended, the work is done, and all the minor dramas, absurdities, and rituals of life fade into the soft embrace of night. Breathe slowly, comfortably. Feel the steady rhythm of existence, the gentle, persistent, quietly humorous heartbeat of life itself, guiding you toward rest. Sleep, patient and deep, is waiting.